Yeah, I'll react to that, sure.
Versed. Preemptive like, my name's Connor if you're new. Hey guys, original link. Link to the original video from Verse, top of the description if you want to watch it yourself. Hello, hope you're doing well. I'm ready to learn. Shall we? How the UK plans to revive their dying languages. Cornish?
This is a sign in Wales.
Dim Betio re promenade.
Written in both Welsh and English. Yet, if you've ever been to Wales, you've probably never heard Welsh being spoken unless you've gone to the northwestern parts of the country, and even that's a maybe. It's the same case in Scotland with Gaelic, Northern Ireland with Irish, the Isle of Man with Manx, and so on. These are languages that have been classified as anywhere between endangered and vulnerable by UNESCO. But things have been changing. In fact, many of these languages are now seeing a resurgence of speakers. So how did this happen? And how did all these countries lose their languages in the first place? Well, like many things in the world, we can thank England for that. Funnily enough, it's actually English that's the outsider language here, as all the others are Celtic languages indigenous to the British Isles that evolved naturally over thousands of years. It was when the Angles, Saxons, and Jutes began settling in Britain in the 5th century from across the North Sea that they brought a mix of closely related West Germanic dialects, which over the centuries gradually merged into what we now call Old English. Long story short, through
So were those native Celtic languages in the British Isles, were they Germanic in origin? Were they also Germanic languages? Because if they're not, then would that mean that Celtic is an extinct language that is neither Romance or Latin or nor Germanic influenced? You know what I mean?
a few more centuries of turmoil, marked by wars and a period when Norman French became the language of the nobility, English was able to survive among the ordinary people. And by the late 14th century, it had re-emerged not just as the language of the land, but as a core part of England's national identity. As we know though, it didn't just end there. Once English was tied to England, its expansion began. Wales was the first Celtic nation to face systematic language oppression from the English state. I know at this point some will say it was technically the Irish with the Statute of Kilkenny, but that's a bit more complicated, which we'll get to in a bit. Anyways, at this point in time, Wales was already under English control after being conquered in 1283, but it still remained culturally and linguistically Welsh. The real turning point came about 250 years later, when the Laws in Wales Act of 1536 and 1543 legally annexed Wales into England, dissolving its legal system and imposing English common law. It made English the only legal language in Welsh courts, contracts, and banned Welsh speakers from holding any public office. What's really telling is how explicit the law was about its ultimate goal. It aimed to extinguish the sinister traditions and customs differing from the laws of this realm. From here on out, Welsh was in a continuous decline. No extra laws were even needed. As the Industrial Revolution began in the 18th century, Wales, especially the south, transformed from a mostly rural society into one of the world's most important industrial regions thanks to their rich coal fields.
Yeah, I think this is a story of many hundreds of languages around the world where a larger power takes control of them and their territory and either force you to get rid of your old customs and languages and assimilate and learn the ruler's language. But also, I'm sure you didn't even have to explicitly do that, because if you want to have any success in, making money or integrating, then you're going to have to learn the language that is most used. Does that make sense?
This economic boom created a massive demand for labor, which brought in tens of thousands of workers from England, who only spoke English, creating a sharp decline in Welsh. As English influence deepened, new tools of suppression emerged, this time in education. In the 19th century, many Welsh schools instituted a disciplinary system called the Welsh Knot. When a child was heard speaking Welsh, they might be made to wear a token, often a small wooden or slate tablet marked WN around their neck. That token would be passed on if other children were caught speaking Welsh, and whoever held it at the end of the school day, or all children who had held it, could face punishment, often a beating with a cane. The 1847 government report, known as the Treason of the Blue Books, made things even worse. This official investigation concluded that Welsh was linked to moral failings and backwardness, crystallizing anti-Welsh sentiment in policy for decades. Despite all this, Welsh was still a majority language by the end of the 19th century. Around 54% of the population could speak Welsh, yet as
Guys, so if the people in Wales prior to this spoke Welsh, Ireland spoke Irish, Gaelic, Scottish spoke a different language, what was the language called in this area when it also had a native Celtic Britannic language? You know?
of the most recent century, around 54% of the population could speak Welsh, yet as of the most recent data, it's sitting at 18%. I should also point out that though these stats seem high, it isn't entirely the full picture.
Screw you guys.
I should also point out that though these stats seem high, it isn't entirely the full picture. It doesn't show how Welsh has changed from a primary national language, with many monolingual speakers, to a language that some people speak fluently and even fewer speak as their only language. The targeting of Irish came just a year after it began in Wales. Now, like I said before, technically the Statute of Kilkenny was the earliest recorded attempt to legislate against a native language, all the way back in 1366. But the thing is, it only applied to a small English-controlled zone around Dublin, known as the Pale. See, at the time, the English really only had power over this region in Ireland, gained from when the Anglo-Normans had invaded in 1169. Their control never really extended beyond it, so Irish remained overwhelmingly dominant on the island. And the statute wasn't really about eradicating the language either, but rather stopping English settlers from adopting Irish culture instead. It was only in 1537 that things changed. A law known as an Act for the English Order, Habit and Language banned the use of Irish in Parliament, mandated English education, and required religious preaching in English too. This, of
Interesting. So it was originally meant so that the area controlled by England on the Irish island they wanted to make it so people didn't assimilate and then relate more with the Irish, but then it expanded.
course, coincided with the Tudor conquest of Ireland, where England went about conquering the island at the same time. By 1603, the entire island was under English control. The language laws didn't just stop here like it did in Wales though, it got even stricter. In 1737, Irish was then banned from use in courtrooms under the Administration of Justice Act, and financial penalties were imposed for violations. It meant that even if you were on trial for your life, you had no legal right to speak your own language in your own country. Next came the 1831 National Schools Act, which created a state-funded nationwide network of
So you couldn't even prove your case in a way you know how to prove it, because you have to limit your speech with another language you might not know as well. Just
Primary Schools Act, which created a state-funded nationwide network of primary schools, all explicitly English only, with Irish not only discouraged but punished in many classrooms. It's important to note that at this point, despite everything, 50% of the country was still speaking Irish in 1840, and at least as of 1800, there were 800,000 monoglot Irish speakers who didn't know English at all. It was really when the Irish famine hit in 1845 that the language was absolutely decimated. The famine affected a disproportionately high number of Irish speakers, since they lived in the poorest, most rural regions, heavily reliant on potatoes. Many of these communities had been pushed westward over centuries of land confiscation, which is where the area was less fertile as well, compounding the issue. The famine lasted just 7 years, yet caused 1 million deaths and forced another 1.5 million more to emigrate. Between 1841 and 1870, the population population had dropped from 8.2 million to 5.4 million, and the number of Irish speakers dropped from 4 million to under a million. By 1891, Irish speakers barely...
I think my ancestors came here at around that time, my dad's side, which is the Irish side. And so I always wonder if it was because of the potato famine that they left. I'm not sure I'll ever really know, though.
Made up 14% of the population, down from close to 51. Irish speakers barely made up 14% of the population, down from close to 50% before the famine. And what's craziest is, between 1800 to 1911, the number of monoglot Irish speakers dropped from 800,000 to just under 17,000. You can see here just how everything changed. After the famine, the language remained in continuous decline thanks to the earlier laws until 1922, when Ireland gained independence and was able to try do something about it. Of course, for Northern Ireland though, the story kept getting worse. The number of primary schools teaching Irish up there was halved between 1924 and 1927. Eventually, the subsidy for Irish as an extra subject was abolished in 1934, and it's been largely ignored ever since. Wait, let's stay on this footage for a second.
I always say this, it's horrible, but it's so effective that the best way to secure a piece of territory that you conquered is to flood your people in and make them as in this case English as possible, and then even when it comes to democratic means of election, you have that base population that identifies with being English. And the same goes for many other countries, is extinguishing the native cultural traditions and language, along with pushing your population into there, is the greatest guarantor that you will solidify your control or at least alliance with that area. It's a horrible thing, but it's clearly effective.
This shot ignored ever since. Wait, let's stay on this footage for a second. This shot comes from the library of the sponsor of today's video, Storyblocks. Storyblocks provides you with all...
If you're interested and you watch it with me, you can fast forward ahead if you want, but if you're interested and you learned about it here, just make sure to use the link from the original video, top of the description. It's only the right thing to do.
The tools you need to tell a story. I know this because they're how I'm telling this one. They provide unlimited access to high-quality stock videos, images, music, sound effects, and even video templates, all authentically created by real artists, something in which we need more of today. Their library has everything you can need. I mean, just right now, let's search Ireland and you'll see the diversity of what's being offered. It's constantly being updated too. This many options available is really helpful for streamlining workflow, saving members an average of 3.5 hours a week in editing. The best part about Storyblocks though is that it's really made simple. Choose a monthly or annual plan with no hidden fees and enjoy everything. That's it. So to get started with
Stay hydrated, but also don't spill water all over your desk.
Unlimited stock media downloads at one set price, head to storyblocks.com.
Oh my God, look at that.
/versed or click the link in the description. Finally, we have Scottish, which perhaps had the most unique situation compared to everyone else. It had two different languages under attack, and they got very different treatment. Down in the lowlands, there was Scots, and up in the highlands was Scottish Gaelic. Scots, first of all, to many people at least, isn't actually seen as its own language, but rather a dialect of English, but it is technically its own thing. Anyways, back when King James VI of Scotland became...
Guys, what is a dialect? Is American English a dialect of British English? Like, is an accent and a dialect the same thing?
King James I of England in 1603, he moved the Scottish royal court to London, and with it, royal prestige shifted to English. Before, Scots had been the language of government, literature, and law in Scotland, but now the monarchy and the elite that followed increasingly adopted English to align themselves with the new power centre. So English became the prestigious language, while Scots became low class. This was intensified by the Acts of Union 1707, which politically joined joined the Kingdom of England and the Kingdom of Scotland into a single political state named Great Britain, with its parliament based in Westminster.
I thought that might have had the opposite effect, that would make it so Scottish, Gaelic, and Scotch, the other, to be more preserved.
Wealthy Scots began hiring English pronunciation teachers specifically to cure them of what they saw as their barbarous accents.
Wow.
This soft suppression was remarkably effective. As English became the language of economic opportunity, everyone followed. Today, about 1.5 million people in Scotland speak some form of Scots, though many may not even recognize it. Now, Scottish Gaelic, on the other hand, was much more brutally suppressed. Given Gaelic was not mutually intelligible with English at all, unlike Scots, it felt way more foreign, which made it easier for authorities to justify suppressing. It began in 1609 with the Statutes of Iona, requiring that Highland Scottish clan chiefs send their heirs to lowland Scotland to be educated in English-speaking Protestant schools. What came next was the Society in Scotland for Propagating Christian Knowledge, or SSPCK for short, founded in 1709. These were a network of private religious schools concentrated in Gaelic-speaking areas and aimed to replace Gaelic with English under the guise of religion and civilization. The teachers were English-speaking outsiders. Gaelic was outright banned, and students were taught their native language was inferior. By the late 1700s, there were hundreds of these schools impacting generations of kids. The suppression became violent, though, after the failed Jacobite rebellions in 1745, when Highland clans rose up against the British state. The government blamed Highland culture for fueling the rebellion, leading to a way more severe crackdown. The Prescription Act in 1746, just a year after the failed uprising, banned Highland dress. In the next year was the Heritable Jurisdictions Act, which abolished the judicial rights of the clan chiefs, breaking the social structure that supported Gaelic. Yet the most damaging law came a century later, with the Education Act of 1872. This is what's often cited as the single most damaging policy to the language. It was a national law, making elementary education in Scotland mandatory, and in English with no Gaelic allowed. While the SSPCK...
Yep. You don't even have to go and forcibly change them to only trying to learn your language. You can just make the structures of education and job finding needing the English language, and it'll just do it itself.
Was a network, and in English with no Gaelic allowed. While the SSPCK was a network with limited reach, this act was nationwide. By the end of the 19th century, Gaelic literacy collapsed, and the language retreated from public life into isolated rural communities. The number of language speakers fell 5% between 1891 and 2022. So it looked like this was game over for all these languages. How do you even recover from such language decline? I mean, Manx and Cornish were even officially declared extinct in 2009 by UNESCO. Well, surprisingly, there has been a rise in many of these languages. In Wales, Welsh has staged a dramatic comeback ever since the 1944 Education Act, which allowed local education authorities to include Welsh in school curriculum for the first time. It was only in 1956 when the first school taught entirely in Welsh, Ysgol Glan Clwyd, was established. The next step came from language legislation, which turned Welsh into a
Your streets are so beautiful. Sorry, distracting me.
established.
Jury subject, sorry.
The next step came from language legislation, which turned Welsh into a living public language. The 1967 Welsh Language Act gave Welsh limited official status, allowing it to be used in legal proceedings. 15 years after this, we began seeing the cultural foundations being put into place. The TV channel S4C launched in 1982 as the first channel specifically for a Welsh-speaking audience. To this day, it remains the only Welsh language broadcaster in the country. In 1993, the updated Welsh Language Act went further, requiring public bodies to provide services in both Welsh and English. When power over Wales's future shifted back to Cardiff under the Government of Wales Act 1998, creating the first National Assembly in centuries, we started to see a rapid acceleration in trying to preserve the language. Just a year later, the teaching of Welsh became mandatory in all schools up to the age of 16, and in 2008, S4C launched Q, the first and only Welsh language children's television block, created to immerse the next generation in the language as early as possible. It would take until 2011, with the passage of the Welsh Language Measure Act, for Welsh to be formally recognised as an official language of Wales, granting regulators the power to enforce compliance with it. Despite all this, if we're to go by the numbers from the census conducted by the Office for National Statistics, which every 10 years requires every household in Wales to report on if they can speak Welsh, among other things, they found that as of 2021, there are 538,000 Welsh speakers, about 18% of the population, while in 2011, there were 562,000 speakers at 19% of the population. If we're to look at a map of this, we're seeing that the most populated regions which are down south are increasing, while the typical Welsh strongholds in the northwest, like Gwynedd, are decreasing. But this
I thought that would be the opposite.
is actually really bad, because the areas where the language is declining is where it has the status as an everyday community language, known as Ifro Gymraeg, while it's growing in places where it will never be the everyday language. It's better to
Your freaking streets are so beautiful. I know this is a serious video and I'm getting distracted, but man, look at how amazing that is.
Gymraeg is where it has the status as an everyday community language, known as Ifro Gymraeg, while it's growing in places where it will never be the everyday language. It's better to have 500,000 people who use the language every day than a million who only know the basics. Despite this, these policies have definitely slowed down its decline, and the Welsh government set a target to have 1 million Welsh speakers by 2050, while passing a new Welsh language and education bill in 2025 to aid in this through more integration, especially for adults learning Welsh. With Irish, there's obviously two sides to its revival, how it's doing in Ireland versus Northern Ireland, which is part of the UK. Obviously, the Republic of Ireland is doing more to try to revive it, but it's honestly not looking good regardless. The first steps towards an official language policy was following the Irish War of Independence, when Irish was made a compulsory subject in all primary and secondary schools. Knowledge of Irish was required for entry into civil service, thereby linking it to career advancement. But the most important early legal step came with the new constitution in 1937, which declared Irish as the first official language of the state and English as the second. Something called Gaeltachts were also established, which are districts in Ireland recognized as Irish being the primary language there. These are actually legally protected zones, which means the government treats Irish as a priority there in a way it doesn't anywhere else. Public services are expected to operate in Irish, schools must teach primarily through it, and state funding is tied directly to promoting and preserving the language.
Okay, I have to pause because I have to say this. So, I've heard that a lot of, I heard this from one person who's from England, so maybe it's not everyone else's opinion, but I hear that a lot, I heard from this person that a lot of the younger generation in England, are starting to have kind of an American accent. And that's important for what I'm going to say here, is that I think it's a great thing that they're reclaiming their heritage and trying to teach their old language that was almost wiped out. But in today's world, where we're all so connected through the internet and social media, social media is the internet. The internet is that we're so connected around the world, and there's a lot of American media that I guess a lot of European youth watch, and so it might seem like cool to speak English, and it's like, why am I learning this other language here? You know, it sounds horrible, but and I wouldn't like it, but I think the fact that everyone around the world is so connected and all of the English speakers around the world are connected, you know, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, USA, Ireland, Scotland, England, Wales, is that you're going to have to get the youth to be interested in it. and I think interested in it and want to learn it, and I think that's going to be harder because they have so much exposure to non-Irish speaking places. Does that make sense? Tell me if you disagree.
Way it doesn't anywhere else. Public services are expected to operate in Irish, schools must teach primarily through it, and state funding is tied directly to promoting and preserving the language. Communities even have to submit official language plans to show how they're strengthening Irish, or risk losing their Gaeltacht status entirely. In the late 20th century came expanding the Irish language media. Radio Éireann began broadcasting in the 60s, and the TV channel TG4 launched in 1996, which was a huge milestone in normalizing Irish in popular culture. The 2000s brought the Official Languages Act of 2003, which was their first comprehensive modern language law, providing public services to be
in popular culture, yeah.
Which was their first comprehensive modern language law, providing public services to be available in Irish. In 2010, the government launched the 20-year strategy for the Irish language to make it actually usable in society. See, one of the problems with how Irish is perceived is that it's seen as more of an academic language, a subject of study rather than part of their culture. As a result, even after 14 years of Irish education, most people can't even string together a sentence. Obviously, this is also because many people see Irish, just like some see Welsh and other minority languages, as wastes of time.
Exactly. If English is such a dominant language around the world, not just in English-speaking cultures, but I know like business communication between countries usually a lot of the time takes place takes place using English. Jesus Christ. And so it seems like something that to older people is very important, and I would say is very important. It's important to hang on to your culture, especially when you have a known history of it being suppressed, and you don't want that to win. But to younger people and people learning it, it's probably going to seem like a chore. And if you're not the most patriotic of patriotic Welsh or Irish or Scottish people who are like, I need to learn this, but it seems like you're learning a language that's going to bring you no more skills in the world, but it's just making the previous generations happy, So I think that's the upsetting part.
Since so few people speak it and basically everyone uses English instead. As a result, the Official Languages Act of 2021 was passed to try promote Irish even more. The biggest aim of the act is for a quota of 20% of public sector jobs to be designated for Irish speakers in 2030, and that state companies will have to spend 20% of their advertising budgets on advertising through the Irish language, with a quarter of that 20% at a minimum having to be spent on the Irish language media.
I'm sure businesses and medias aren't going to be happy because they're being forced to spend something on a language that doesn't help them reach more audiences, since everyone already knows English. It's like,
According to the Irish census of 2022, almost 1.9 million people, or about 40% of the population, claimed some ability in Irish, which is actually an increase of 6% from 2016. Though this can mean they just know a few words. The actual number of daily speakers has dropped 2% since then. Estimates of fully native speakers range from just 40,000 to 80,000, just 1% of the population. If we're to look at Northern Ireland, the Irish language is way further behind for obvious reasons. In fact, it was only in 2022 when the British Parliament passed the Identity and Language Act, which made Irish alongside English as the two official languages of the country. It also repealed the 1737 ban of Irish in Northern Irish courts. Just 12% of the population claims to be able to speak Irish, but it is increasing. Like I said earlier, Scotland is in a unique situation, as there are really two languages at play here, and they were actually just given official status with the recent Scottish Languages Act of 2025. But with Scots, there hasn't been much done about reviving it, because it's never really fully disappeared. I mean, there's no dedicated language law for it. It has been
I need to go to Scotland.
Really fully disappeared. I mean...
Oh my god, that's so beautiful. Wow.
There's no dedicated language law for it. It has begun to appear in Scottish schools' curriculum since 2004, but it's still seen as more of a dialect these days. That's better than facing language extinction though. Scottish Gaelic, on the other hand, has faced a similar battle to their Celtic language counterparts, but it is actually on the up. In fact, we're currently in the midst of a Scottish Gaelic Renaissance movement, believe it or not. If we look at the stats, the number of speakers and percentage of population has actually increased for the first time since 1971. There's also been a steady increase in children's education through Gaelic for over a decade now. Yet, funnily enough though, attempts to maintain the language only started fairly recently, when in 1973, the only university to operate solely in Scottish Gaelic opened. And in 1995, BBC Radio Non-Gael launched as the first Scottish Gaelic language radio station. Legally, it was only in 2005 when the language first received symbolic recognition with the Gaelic Languages Act. 3 years later, in 2008, BBC Alba launched as the first and only TV channel in the language. The channel produces everything from children's programs to crime dramas. Shows like the recent crime thriller and Ceylan have broken viewing records and been sold to broadcasters across Europe. There's been an economic benefit to this too. Independent research has found that Gaelic media generates £1.34 for every £1 invested and supports 340 jobs across Scotland, many of them in remote Highland and Island communities that desperately need economic opportunities. The Scottish government now spends £35 million annually on Gaelic initiatives, teacher training, school programs, media content, and cultural events. That's a massive investment for a language with fewer than 70,000 speakers, but seems to be paying off. For all these languages, the battle still isn't over, and the truth is, it's still looking more than likely that English is advancing on all that is left of them. Language is the soul of a culture. When it dies, the culture soon follows. So hopefully it doesn't come to this, but I guess we'll see. Thank you for watching.
Thank you for making. So my last great video. Well, anything I said that was wrong, guys, call me out. Answering any of my questions, you're always great. Love y'all. I want to say one more thing though. So there are a lot of Spanish speakers in the USA who are like first generation American immigrants. Like we have a lot of Spanish speaking immigrants, right, from Latin and Southern America, and the children of those of their parents who immigrated don't, like, they just learn English in school, but their parents don't know it, and so they learn Spanish at home. So they're perfectly American English speakers because they were born here and grew up in our schools and their friends speak it. But when they're at home, I'm sure they only speak Spanish. And so I don't really have a suggestion here, but I find that interesting that Spanish survives even if you are a person of Latin American origin in America, and you were born here and your parents weren't. They were born in Latin and Central and Southern America. They can speak both perfectly, and it doesn't matter about them having to learn it in school, because from their friends and society and school, they learn English perfectly like any other American. But in the home since birth, I'm assuming, they were speaking Spanish as well. And so they know both perfectly. I don't really know how to how that would work over here, but I thought of that. So love y'all. Hope you're all doing well. Appreciate any comments. See you guys next time. We'll keep on learning together. Bye, guys.